Right now, before anything else, hold both hands out and look carefully at the surface of each nail. Find the lines running lengthwise from base to tip. Most people over 60 have them. Most people over 60 have been told the same three words: normal with aging. That explanation is partially true and almost entirely insufficient, because deep, prominent, rapidly worsening nail ridges, particularly when accompanied by brittleness, splitting, or a change in color, are not a cosmetic variation. They are a signal. And the conditions they signal are serious enough that a cardiologist, a neurologist, and an endocrinologist would each recognize them on site and order specific tests within the same appointment. I am Dr. Arthur White, and what I'm about to show you changes how you read your own body. I want you to keep both hands out in front of you for just a moment longer, because before I walk you through the 5 conditions that produce this change, I need you to understand something that most people are never told. Not all vertical nail ridges are the same. That distinction is the entire foundation of what we are about to cover. And without it, everything else risks sounding like an alarm when it may not need to be, or, more dangerously, like reassurance when it absolutely should not be. The clinical term for vertical nail ridging is onychorhexis. You do not need to remember that word. What you do need to hold on to is the distinction it contains. Fine, shallow ridging that has developed so gradually you cannot remember your nails ever looking different. Ridging that affects only some nails, that has not changed in years, that arrives without any other accompanying nail change, does reflect something real about normal aging. The nail matrix, the tissue at the base of each nail where new cells are produced around the clock, slows its rate of cell turnover as we get older. The longitudinal architecture of the nail plate becomes slightly less uniform as a result. That is true. That happens. And for some people, that is the complete explanation. But that benign explanation accounts for only a portion of what I see in my older patients. Not a comforting portion. Deep ridges, prominent ridges, ridges that a patient tells me appeared or worsened noticeably in the past 6 to 18 months. Ridges accompanied by nails that split at the tip, break with almost no provocation, grow more slowly than they used to, or have shifted in color towards something duller, yellower, or faintly opaque. Those are not a cosmetic variation. They are a signal, and the conditions they signal are serious enough that a cardiologist, a neurologist, and an endocrinologist would each recognize them on site and order specific tests within the same appointment. That gap between what the research shows and what most patients are ever told is exactly what I want to close for you today. To understand why your nails carry this information at all, you need one small piece of biology. Your nail matrix is one of the most metabolically demanding tissues in your entire body. It divides faster than almost any other tissue, and because it divides so rapidly, it depends on an extraordinarily dense network of the body's smallest blood vessels, the capillaries running directly beneath the nail bed, to deliver the oxygen and nutrients that cell production requires. Those capillaries are among the first structures in the body to reflect systemic stress. They are sensitive to reductions in oxygen, to disruptions in nutrient delivery, to inflammatory signals circulating in the bloodstream, and to changes in the hormonal environment that governs cell production throughout the body. Think of your nail matrix the way I think of it in the clinic, as a tissue with almost no tolerance for being under-resourced. When the body is struggling, the nail matrix shows it early, and it shows it visibly. After 60, this matters more than it did at 40. The body's reserves for compensating silently around its function become narrower with age. Signals that might have stayed invisible for years in a younger person begin to surface earlier. In my experience, the nail is often where they surface first, before laboratory values have moved into a range that anyone would flag at a routine appointment, and long before a patient has any symptom dramatic enough to bring them in on their own. The problem is a structural one. A standard clinical appointment runs 15 minutes, sometimes less. Nail examination rarely rises to the top of the priority list unless something is visually alarming. The research connecting vertical nail ridge patterns to specific systemic conditions exists in medical literature. It is recognized by specialists across cardiology, endocrinology, rheumatology, and neurology. It simply never makes its way to the person sitting at home who has been looking at their own hands every day and accepting the explanation they were given. That is the gap. That is what bothers me. And that ends today. Before we go any further, I want you to do something in the comments right now. Type your age and tell me whether anyone, a doctor, a specialist, anyone, has ever told you that your nail ridges might be connected to something beyond normal aging. Your answer is going to tell me exactly how wide that gap still is. And stay with me through to the very end, because the fifth condition I cover today links vertical nail ridging to a cardiovascular risk marker that a landmark study found more predictive of heart attack than total cholesterol in certain patient populations. That is not a footnote. That is the kind of finding that should change how a condition gets screened for in every clinic that sees adults over 60. I am going to walk you through 5 conditions, each producing vertical nail ridging as a visible and early manifestation, and each carrying a direct and serious connection to your cardiovascular system. A patient I will call Raymond came to see me when he was 67. He had been feeling more tired than usual for several months. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would have sent most people to an urgent care clinic. He attributed it, as most people do, to the natural slowing that comes with age. During the examination, I noticed his nails. The ridging was pronounced, deeper than the fine surface variation I would expect from aging alone, and several nails had begun to curve slightly concave at the center, cupping inward rather than arching outward the way a healthy nail does. I asked him some careful questions and ordered a full blood panel. The results came back with significantly low ferritin levels. Raymond had iron deficiency anemia that had been developing quietly for close to a year. His nails had been documenting it the entire time. Nobody had thought to read them. The first condition I want to walk you through is iron deficiency anemia. And the connection to your nails runs directly through the biology of keratin production. Keratin is the structural protein from which your nails are made. Iron is not incidentally but fundamentally essential, both for the production of keratin itself and for the metabolic function of the nail matrix cells that produce it. When your ferritin levels drop, nail matrix activity slows. The orderly, layered architecture of the nail plate begins to break down. The result is longitudinal ridging that deepens progressively as the deficiency worsens. In its more advanced form, iron deficiency does not stop at ridging. It transforms the shape of the nail entirely, pulling it from its natural outward curve into a concave dish. That condition is called koilonychia or spoon nail. Look at your nails right now. If any of them appear to curve inward rather than outward, that is a detail worth bringing to your doctor this week, not at your next annual visit, this week. What makes the research behind this particularly important is the timing. A 2017 study published in the Indian Journal of Dermatology confirmed that nail changes including longitudinal ridging and koilonychia were among the earliest and most reliable physical signs of iron deficiency in adults, appearing before laboratory values had deteriorated to the levels typically considered diagnostic. That is not a minor finding. It means the nail is giving you a window of time. A window in which the deficiency is real and worsening, but in which the intervention is still early and the damage is still reversible. Iron deficiency in older adults is not a minor nutritional gap. When ferritin levels stay low over a sustained period, the heart is forced to pump harder and faster to compensate for the reduced oxygen-carrying capacity in the blood. Sustained iron deficiency anemia is independently associated with accelerated heart failure progression and elevated cardiovascular mortality. Raymond is doing very well today. His levels normalized over several months with supplementation and dietary guidance, and a follow-up cardiovascular assessment found no lasting damage. His nails opened that conversation at exactly the right moment. If this has been useful to you so far, I want to ask one thing before we continue. hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it genuinely determines whether this content reaches other adults over 60 who are looking at these same changes on their own hands tonight and have never been given a real explanation. Stay with me, because the second condition affects an estimated 10 to 15% of adults in this age group, and the majority of them have no idea. The second condition is hypothyroidism, an underactive thyroid gland, and it is one of the most consistently underdiagnosed chronic conditions in adults over 60. The reason it escapes detection so reliably is that its symptoms develop so slowly and resemble the ordinary experience of aging so closely that neither patients nor physicians tend to flag them as pathological. Fatigue, feeling colder than others in the same room, a slight slowing of thought, mild weight gain. These are the kinds of changes most people absorb quietly into their understanding of what getting older feels like. Not a disease, just age. That assumption is the problem. The thyroid hormones T3 and T4 regulate the metabolic rate of every cell in the body, including the keratinocytes in the nail matrix. When thyroid hormone levels fall, nail matrix cell division slows. Keratin production becomes disordered. The nail plate develops a characteristic and recognizable cluster of changes alongside the longitudinal ridging. Nails that grow noticeably more slowly than they used to. Nails that break or split with very little mechanical stress. Nails that have lost the subtle gloss of a well-nourished surface and appear dull or faintly opaque. And nails that may carry a slight yellowish or washed-out tone. That cluster, ridging plus slow growth plus brittleness plus dullness, is a pattern I recognize immediately in the clinic. It almost always prompts me to order a thyroid panel before the patient has left the building. A patient I will call Miriam came to see me at 72 for what she described as a routine visit. She felt, in her own words, reasonably well, just slower than she used to be, which she had accepted as inevitable. Her nails were dull, ridged across every finger, and growing so slowly she had barely needed to trim them in 2 months. I ordered a thyroid panel. Her TSH was elevated, and her free T4 was at the low end of the reference range. A picture consistent with subclinical hypothyroidism, a state in which thyroid hormone levels are borderline low and the patient feels relatively well, or at least not dramatically unwell. We began thyroid replacement therapy at a conservative dose and adjusted it carefully over the following months. Within a year, her nail appearance had improved noticeably. Her energy had returned to a level she had not experienced in years, and her cardiovascular risk profile had shifted meaningfully in the right direction. That last point deserves a moment. Untreated hypothyroidism does not stay contained to the thyroid. It elevates LDL cholesterol. It raises diastolic blood pressure. It reduces heart rate variability. It accelerates atherosclerosis, the progressive narrowing and hardening of the arteries that underlies most heart attacks and strokes. A 2019 meta-analysis published in the journal Thyroid found that subclinical hypothyroidism was associated with a 20% increased risk of coronary heart disease events and a 39% increased risk of cardiovascular mortality in adults over 65. Not marginal numbers. And that elevated risk is almost entirely preventable with appropriate thyroid replacement therapy once the diagnosis is made. The diagnosis that begins, in many cases, with a set of dull, slow-growing, ridged nails that a patient assumed were simply part of getting older. A patient I will call Bernhard came to see me at 69. His chief complaint had nothing to do with his nails. He had come in for a follow-up on his blood pressure, which had been mildly elevated for several years and was being managed with a single medication. During the examination, I asked him to remove his shoes and socks. It is a habit I developed early in my career, and it has repaid itself many times over. The toenails on both feet were thickened, discolored, and growing at what he described as almost no rate at all. His fingernails told a subtler version of the same story. Prominent longitudinal ridging, slightly slower growth than he remembered, a surface that had lost its natural sheen. I asked whether his feet ever felt cold, whether he noticed any aching in his calves when he walked a certain distance. He said yes to both. He had attributed both entirely to age. We ran vascular studies. Bernhard had peripheral artery disease affecting both his lower and upper extremities. Systemic atherosclerosis advanced enough that it had begun to compromise the arterial supply, reaching the nail matrix capillaries of his fingers and toes on a continuous chronic basis. Nobody had connected those findings to his nails. Nobody had looked. The third condition is peripheral artery disease, the narrowing of the arteries supplying blood to the extremities, and the connection to nail ridging runs through the same capillary biology I described earlier. Your nail matrix is fed by the body's smallest blood vessels. Those capillaries have almost no reserve capacity. When the volume of oxygenated blood arriving at the fingertip drops chronically, the nail matrix feels it immediately and continuously. The result is disrupted nail plate production, ridging, thickening, slowed growth. In the toenails especially, discoloration and progressive deformity. The fingernail changes in peripheral artery disease are subtler than the toenail changes because the arms receive meaningfully better circulation than the legs in most patients. But they are present, they are measurable, and they matter enormously. Data from the REACH registry, one of the largest international registries of cardiovascular risk in outpatient populations, found that peripheral artery disease at the severity that produces nail changes in both the fingers and toes carries a 2 to 4-fold elevated risk of heart attack and stroke. That is not a footnote. And the majority of patients at this stage of disease are on no cardiovascular protective therapy at all, because their vascular disease has been attributed entirely to their nails, their joints, or their age. Bernhard is on appropriate therapy today. He told me at his last visit that he had assumed the changes in his feet were simply what older feet looked like. Nobody had told him otherwise. The fourth condition is rheumatoid arthritis, a systemic autoimmune inflammatory disease that affects not only the joints, but the blood vessels, the heart, and every connective tissue in the body. It produces vertical nail ridging through two simultaneous mechanisms. The first is direct inflammation of the nail matrix. Immune complexes deposited in the small vessels of the nail bed disrupt the orderly production of nail plate layers from within, producing ridging that reflects local inflammatory damage. The second mechanism is systemic. The sustained elevation of inflammatory cytokines that characterizes active rheumatoid arthritis disrupts keratin synthesis throughout the body, meaning the nail changes are both local and systemic at once. What makes this condition particularly critical to discuss here is a fact that remains poorly communicated to rheumatoid arthritis patients themselves. Adults with rheumatoid arthritis carry a cardiovascular risk profile that is comparable to that of adults with type 2 diabetes, not slightly elevated, comparable. A landmark 2010 study published in the Annals of the Rheumatic Diseases found that cardiovascular disease accounts for approximately 40% of all deaths in rheumatoid arthritis patients, that this elevated risk begins appearing within the first year of disease onset, and that the majority of excess cardiovascular deaths occur without any prior diagnosis of heart disease. The heart disease develops silently in parallel with the arthritis, and the first sign is often a fatal event. Nail ridging in a patient with rheumatoid arthritis is therefore not simply a dermatological consequence of joint inflammation. It is a visible reminder that the same inflammatory process working on the joints is working simultaneously on the coronary arteries. The fifth condition is the one I asked you to stay for. And if you take a proton pump inhibitor, if you use metformin for blood sugar management, or if you simply eat less animal protein than you once did, I want you to pay particular attention to what comes next. B12 and folate deficiency produces vertical nail ridging through a direct disruption of DNA synthesis in the nail matrix. Both nutrients are essential cofactors for cell division in rapidly dividing tissues, and the nail matrix, turning over faster than almost any other tissue in the body, is among the first places a deficiency becomes visible. B12 deficiency is extraordinarily prevalent in adults over 60 for three independent and compounding reasons. reduced stomach acid production, which is required to release B12 from food proteins, widespread use of proton pump inhibitors, which suppress acid further, and metformin use, which actively interferes with B12 absorption in the gut lining. 3 separate mechanisms. Any one of them is sufficient. Many older adults are living with all 3 simultaneously and have never been told. In darker-skinned individuals, B12 deficiency produces a characteristic browning or hyperpigmentation of the nail bed, alongside the ridging, a detail almost never discussed in general health content, but one I consider a specific and meaningful signal. Neurological symptoms frequently accompany the nail changes: tingling in the hands and feet, subtle difficulty with balance, and a cognitive slowing that is regularly misattributed to normal aging or early dementia. The cardiovascular connection runs through homocysteine. B12 deficiency causes homocysteine to accumulate in the bloodstream. Elevated homocysteine is an independent risk factor for coronary artery disease, stroke, and peripheral vascular disease. A 2002 study published in the New England Journal of Medicine identified homocysteine as a stronger predictor of cardiovascular events than total cholesterol in certain patient populations. Stronger than total cholesterol. That is the finding I want you to carry with you, because B12 deficiency is among the most correctable conditions on this entire list and among the most consistently missed. Now I want to give you a framework for what to do with everything we have covered. Start today, not next week, not at your next appointment. Take both hands to a window in good natural daylight and look at each nail one at a time. Work through 4 distinctions. First, are the ridges fine and shallow, or are they deep and prominent enough to cast a visible shadow along the nail surface? Second, do they affect only some nails, or are they present across all 10 fingers in roughly the same degree? Third, are they accompanied by any other change? Brittleness, splitting at the tip, slowed growth, lost gloss, a shift in color toward yellow or opacity, or in darker skin tones, browning of the nail bed. Fourth, and most important, did these ridges appear or worsen noticeably within the past 6 to 18 months, or have they been present in essentially the same form for as long as you can remember? Newly prominent ridging in an adult who previously had smooth nails is a fundamentally different clinical signal from lifelong fine ridging. It deserves a fundamentally different response. After you have examined your nails, do one more thing before you set your hands down. Press the thumb of one hand firmly against the nail of your index finger on the other hand for 2 full seconds, then release. Watch how quickly the pink color returns to the nail bed. In a healthy adult with good circulation, that color returns in under 2 seconds. If it takes 3 seconds or longer, and you get the same slow result when you test 3 or 4 different fingers, that is a meaningful sign that your microvascular circulation is sluggish. Do this in a warm room with warm hands so that cold temperature does not distort the result. Try it right now while the description is still fresh. Write down what you find. Photograph both hands today in natural light and give yourself something honest to compare against 6 months from now. Human memory is unreliable across months and years. A photograph is not. If you identify one of the signs we have discussed, mention it specifically at your next routine appointment. If you identify 2 or more of these signs together, particularly if the ridging is deep, has worsened recently, and is accompanied by brittleness, color change, or slowed growth, do not wait for your annual visit. Call your doctor's office this week. Describe exactly what you observed and ask whether you need to be evaluated sooner. That phone call is the step most people never take. It is also the step that makes all the difference. One more thing before I close. Please do not use any of this to diagnose yourself. The full clinical picture, your history, your medications, your other symptoms, your laboratory values, is what produces an accurate diagnosis, and that picture belongs in a physician's hands. Your job is not to diagnose. Your job is to notice, to document, and to speak up. That is the part most people never do, and it is the part that changes what happens next. Your nails have been sitting at the end of your fingers your entire life. They have been taking notes every single day about how your blood is moving, how your smallest vessels are functioning, and what your body has been quietly trying to tell you. The only thing that was missing was someone explaining how to read what they have been recording. You now have that. Use it. Share this with someone you love, because the next person who watches this may be the one who finally gets the explanation they were never given, looks at their own hands tonight, and makes a call that changes everything.